My wife was unfaithful to me with my brother, and both ended up shot to death. If this story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and share in the comments which city you're watching from. We'd love to know where our community is growing. Some betrayals hurt much more than others. It'd have been incredible to be able to tell this from a spectator's perspective, but instead, I'm forced to do it from my own experience. We've all seen those high school TV shows where someone ends up being friends with the person they were supposed to hate out of solidarity. Think of what happened to me as something like that, but much worse. I'm a 31-year-old man, have been married to my 29-year-old wife for only 3 years, and we're already reaching the end of our road. Just a month ago, I loved this woman more than I've ever loved anyone. Look at how quickly life hits you, much faster than I'd have liked. Before I can talk about all this, I have to start by telling you about my 34-year-old older brother. We were close as kids, we have a younger sister, and those are all the children in our family. My brother and I were best friends growing up, and naturally, when he went to college, we drifted apart a bit. That's when the trouble started. I don't know if he was partying too much or if he started getting involved with substances. He always maintained that was never the case, but rather that he simply got bored of school. That ended with him dropping out of school despite the ridiculous amounts of money my parents had saved to ensure he could get a good education. I was very upset with him back then because we didn't come from a particularly wealthy family. It wasn't easy for my parents to try to save college funds for 3 kids. His dropping out of school should have meant there was extra money left, but that wasn't the case because it wasn't just about him being tired of studying. He ended up getting into some legal trouble that I don't want to talk about here, because it was genuinely a very difficult period for all of us. My parents had to be the ones to get him out of that mess, and they paid a lot of money over the years. That ended up affecting the money that had been saved for my sister and me. Despite being the middle child, I've always felt that I've been the most responsible one. I chose a school that didn't cost as much and made a lot of sacrifices to put the least possible burden on my parents. In the end, it worked out, and I saved enough so they could allocate it to my sister's college fund, so she didn't have to sacrifice anything the way I had. That should make the fact that I resent my brother a bit more understandable. But that's not even the whole story. He keeps claiming he has nothing to do with illegal substances, but his life hasn't improved since then. He can't keep a job for a full month. He's basically a parasite. I got tired of sending him money, so I asked him if he wanted to start some kind of business and what kind of startup capital he might need. I wasn't going to give him money directly. I was going to buy the things he needed. He told me he wanted to start doing home deliveries and app-based transport, that kind of thing. That sounded fine to me. All he needed was a presentable car. So I searched hard in the used car market and found a very good deal on a Toyota for a few $1,000s. It was a lot of money for me, but I just wanted to make sure he was okay and had something solid to build from. I really wanted to believe he just needed a new start because it sounded like he was ready to change and improve. I was a fool for expecting anything different. Genuinely, only 3 months went by before I asked him how everything was going, and he told me the customers were idiots. I asked him what that meant. He claimed they didn't like him and gave him bad ratings. His accounts on both platforms ended up being disabled. I asked him how that was possible. He acted as if he were a saint against whom people simply had a personal vendetta for some reason. I told him he could try some of the other platforms for those services, but he replied there was no point. He didn't like that job anyway. I pointed out that most of us didn't like our jobs, but we did them to make a living. But no, he wanted to be comfortable despite being essentially homeless, without any direction or real money to his name. What happened to the car? I asked him, and he said he'd sold it. To say I was furious would be an understatement. I hadn't been that angry in a long time, but that day everything came to light. I cursed him and told him I was sick of it. I simply couldn't deal with him anymore, and I warned him never to look for me to ask for help again. He got angry, and we basically had a shouting match. I didn't say anything I really regret. I just told him how I truly felt about him. He'd been someone with a future, and he chose to take his life down the worst possible path. We tried to help him get out of it on multiple occasions, but it was clear he wasn't serious when he accepted the help. I didn't know what others thought, but I was done with him, and he was no longer welcome in either my house or my life. All this background information is a lot, but it's very necessary for you to understand my story. My wife knew all of this. There was no one I vented to more about this subject than her. She knew how much it irritated me to talk about my brother, and she shared my annoyances. As far as I knew, sometimes she seemed even more annoyed than I did. That's why what happened next drove me crazy. My brother came to the house one day when I was at work. It's important to mention that my wife doesn't work full-time. She works part-time, but the income she gets from that has always been enough to keep us afloat for the most part. I know he entered the house because of the cameras we've outside and inside. He knew I wasn't home and claimed he only came to take a shower. I'm not surprised she let him in, as it'd be harder for her to reject him in the face of such a human request. I'd have done it, but since she's more of a stranger to him, I could understand why she'd find it hard to be so cruel to his face. He wanted to take a shower, and when he finished, she'd cooked him something. He hadn't asked for that, but she chose to do it for whatever reason. I don't want to say she did it out of the goodness of her heart, because of all people, she wouldn't have done that for him, knowing our relationship. They spoke for a long time, and then, at one point, their tones of voice became so low that I could no longer catch what they were saying. Then he got up and walked out of the camera's view as if he were leaving the house, but I knew that wasn't the case. She followed him. Our bedroom is one of the places in the house without cameras. He didn't go out to the street after that, and according to the timestamps, he left the house 42 minutes later. So, where did the two of them disappear after going out of the frame of the indoor camera? You don't need to be an Einstein. If she'd stayed in view, I'd assume he'd asked her if he could take a nap in a real bed, but she disappeared with him in the same direction, and that direction had bedrooms. I didn't want to believe it because it didn't seem to make any sense. My brother never seemed to show interest in my wife, and she'd shown even less interest in him during the whole time we knew each other. But for a man who spends his time couch surfing among his friends and being a bit homeless, I could understand he probably hadn't been with a woman in a while. My wife's an attractive woman, and I could understand him finding her attractive at the right moment. But regarding her interest in him, I almost wanted to believe that, being the good-for-nothing brother he'd proven to be, he might have abused her to get his way. I don't like the guy, but even I didn't want to think he could be such scum. The only reason I don't believe that's what happened is that every minute of my wife's recording, after they suddenly reappeared on camera, shows her in a seemingly normal mood. After he left, she didn't break down or cry. She didn't stare into space. She didn't call a friend or ask anyone for help. She went to eat a bowl of cereal and watch TikTok on her phone. That wasn't the mood of someone to whom something traumatic had happened, and I'd have sworn she even looked happier than usual. I checked her phone, but there was nothing noteworthy. My brother sometimes had a phone, and other times didn't. She didn't have any messages or calls from him, so I couldn't even verify anything, even if I wanted to. I saved the video recording and showed it to some of my closest friends. All of them know the situation with my brother, and I didn't give them any context. I just told them to watch it and tell me what they thought. Each and every one of them asked where my brother and my wife had disappeared to. They've been to my house enough to know the layout, and one of my friends said directly that they must have gone to the bedroom. Another one of them watched the video twice before overcoming his denial and saying they must have been together in a part of the house, and for too long to think of anything other than that they were doing something inappropriate. I know it's not just me. I'm not the only one who thinks the two of them slept together. I know this will probably have to head toward a divorce, but before getting to that point, I'm going to confront my wife. I want to see what she has to say, because that'll make all the difference. Maybe she'll give me an explanation that makes logical sense, and I'll believe her, or maybe she'll stammer and not know what to say, and that'll be a completely different story. Either way, I'll find out in a day or two. I won't force myself to live with a woman I can't trust for a single second longer than necessary. Update 1. When your intuition tells you something, or a certain conclusion seems to be the only answer, I think the smart thing is to simply trust it. Probably only 1% of the time do things have a reasonable explanation, but the other 99% of the time, it's exactly what it looks like. Earlier I posted about my wife, who seemed to have cheated on me with my useless brother. She knows everything about him, so I didn't want to believe she'd ever cheat on me with him, especially since I'd never perceived the slightest trace of chemistry between them, but the evidence I had seemed to point to that. Well, the evidence was correct, and all it took was for me to pressure her completely until she ended up spilling the truth. I didn't enjoy it because somewhere beneath all the resentment I'd accumulated toward her, there was still a little love left. I didn't like scaring her or frightening her completely, but it was absolutely necessary. It was a Saturday, and she was preparing food in the kitchen. I told her I needed to talk to her and waited for her to finish what she was doing. She paid attention to me immediately and asked me what was wrong. I asked her what my brother had come to do at the house a few days ago. She seemed surprised I knew, and she shouldn't have been because she knows we've cameras, but I guess she thought I only check them when something happens. I check them regularly, but not daily. She thought the recording'd eventually be overwritten and she'd get off scot-free. She told me he couldn't take a shower. Maybe she assumed I knew because my brother himself had mentioned it, or maybe she guessed I'd check the cameras. If I hadn't checked the recordings, she could have lied, saying he was only there for a few minutes. She chose to stay in a middle ground, saying he hadn't been there for more than 15 or 20 minutes. That wasn't true. He was in the house for almost an hour, 57 minutes to be exact. She wouldn't be so wrong if she really believed he hadn't been there that long. I asked her why she let him in, and she claimed it was too much to ask her to kick out her brother-in-law when all he wanted was to clean himself up. I nodded and told her I understood because in a way it was, and then I dropped the bomb on her. So, are you telling me the two of you didn't have sex? Her body flinched when I said that. She hesitated and then started to deny it, saying she'd never do that, repeating that he'd only taken a shower. She told me she'd cooked him something and then he'd left. She assured me she wasn't attracted to him, that she wouldn't even if she were because she was married to me, claiming she'd never been unfaithful in her life and had always respected me, keeping on saying things to convince me she'd never cheat on me. I nodded, pulled out my phone, and showed her the video along with the timestamps. First, I pointed out she had no reason to trust me because she'd lied to me about how long he'd stayed in the house, being there 3 times longer than she claimed. I pointed out the exact moment both of them disappeared from the shot and the actual time he was seen leaving the house, and I asked her to explain that. She started stammering, unable to do it, but went so far as to claim that what she was seeing wasn't real. I wanted her to clarify if she was suggesting it was artificial intelligence or something similar, but she had no answer. I told her we weren't going to be together anymore, as divorce would come no matter what, so I preferred she tell me the truth before I got really angry. She remained silent for a long time before uttering a word, and that was enough to know she was ready to admit the truth. Something had happened. I already knew it, but for some reason, at that exact moment, it truly broke my heart, and I felt completely shattered. She told me my brother had asked her to speak about something in private because he knew the cameras were there, saying they went to the bedroom, and he confessed to her that life been going very badly for him lately, and he just needed a win. Apparently, the win he'd settled for was sleeping with his brother's wife, and her voice trailed off after that. She hadn't been able to reject him when he asked for a shower, and I understood that, but now she tried to tell me she couldn't reject him when he wanted to sleep with her either. I asked her if they'd at least use protection, and she tried to lie, but it was enough for me to raise my voice for her to admit they hadn't, so I simply shook my head. I got up and went straight to a divorce lawyer's office. She tried to stop me so we'd stay and talk, but I left there too quickly for that to happen, as I had nothing left to talk about with her. The whole conversation had been recorded, and added to the camera footage, I could prove to anyone she'd cheated on me. It annoys me that things between us had to end this way, but I'm done with her, and I need to get out of this marriage as quickly as possible. Update 2. Good things come to an end, but bad things do too. My marriage was good most of the time, at least that's what I felt, but that came to an end and turned bad. Fortunately, that ended too, and I'm happy it did. I couldn't stand any more of it. I genuinely couldn't. I went to see a divorce lawyer, explained the whole situation to him, and a piece of unsolicited advice he gave me turned out to be the exact reason I hired him. My wife and I weren't rich, and since she didn't work full-time, I had most of the money saved, but I refused to let her walk away with half for cheating on me. The advice I received reminded me that I had many debts to pay back to some of my closest friends. How foolish of me to forget about that. So a large amount of money left my account and was paid to a handful of friends. When I told her it was time to part ways, she refused to leave the house, so I left. Fortunately, I had several friends who helped me pack all my things, and I knew that with her part-time job, she wouldn't be able to keep paying the rent on that house on her own. Even with alimony, she'd spend too much. When the divorce started, she tried to play the victim role and claimed I'd been negligent and emotionally manipulative, but I had her confession recorded, something she didn't know, and I had the videos of her and my brother. I also gave the court all the context of the relationship between him and me, so they knew letting him in was completely her fault, even if she claimed she'd slept with him only because she felt neglected. The debts to my friends were fiercely contested, but my lawyer fought back hard. I don't know if the judge was entirely convinced the debts were real, but maybe he took my side and didn't want her to use the law to get away with it after the infidelity. The debts were recognized, and that money couldn't be taken into account for the division of assets. In addition, some money was deducted from her share because I was the one who had to find new lodging, and the actual cash left was basically nothing. She did receive alimony, which I knew was going to happen. I couldn't avoid it. As soon as things were finalized, I disappeared from her life, but I wasn't finished. I told my parents, her parents, and all our friends how things had ended between us. My parents were very upset with both of them, and although they'd held out hope for my brother for a very long time, they finally let him go over this, as he'd finally gone too far. Her parents weren't happy, of course, and as for our friends, they didn't want to deal with someone capable of cheating on her husband with her brother-in-law, so they didn't want her around. Almost overnight, both were isolated from the people they associated with most, which made me very happy, but that wasn't the best part for me. The best part was that my brother continued his useless life, which he's already used to, but she's not used to having nothing. She was comfortable in her marriage to me working only part-time, but now she has adult bills over her head and not enough income, even with alimony, as just rent takes all the money she receives from me. So, she's already preparing to move. I'm enjoying watching her life destabilize so much from not being able to restrain herself from cheating on me. She doesn't deserve good things. She's tried to call me about 10 times in the last week, and as curious as I might be, I don't care enough to find out what she has to say. We're already done, and she'll never again have the chance to be someone I care about. Update 3. Some time has passed since I decided to completely close that chapter of my life and let the consequences of their own actions consume them. Disconnecting from everything gave me the peace I needed, but living in such a small world, it was inevitable that sooner or later I'd learn about the outcome of their story, and the end couldn't have been darker or more violent. My ex-wife and my brother are dead. Both were shot to death. I found out about everything through my ex-in-laws, as despite the atrocity their daughter committed, they were always decent people to me and knew perfectly well I wasn't to blame for anything. Shattered by grief, they called me to tell me about the tragedy. As they explained to me, after I discovered them and our entire network of friends and family completely isolated them, they ended up doing the only thing left, uniting in their own misery. Since neither of them had a pot to piss in or anyone's support, they decided to move in together and rented a small, neglected apartment in one of the worst areas of town. She thought they'd at least have each other, but being with a parasite only drags you faster to the bottom of the pit. The real collateral problem was my brother, who, true to his irresponsible and shady lifestyle, dragged an enormous debt with dangerous loan sharks from the underground world, people who don't make contracts or accept delays. Unable to pay on time and accumulating interest he could never cover with his laziness, he tried to hide in that apartment with my ex-wife. But you don't escape that class of men so easily. A couple of nights ago, a group of armed subjects located the place, kicked the door down, and asked no questions, finding both of them inside and shooting them to death without mercy, leaving a gruesome scene. She ended up paying with her life for allying herself with the person who was only looking for a win at the expense of others. My ex-in-laws called me in tears, not to blame me, but looking for a familiar ear in the midst of their immense tragedy, and it was an uncomfortable and gloomy conversation. I offered them my condolences respectfully, because at the end of the day, they're parents who've just lost a daughter in the worst possible way, but I kept my emotional distance. Hanging up, I sat in silence processing the news next to my cup of coffee. It's chilling to think about how a single afternoon of betrayal triggered a domino effect that ended in a double homicide in a rundown apartment. I don't feel joy over their deaths, but I don't feel pity either, as my brother and my ex-wife dug their own grave from the moment they decided to act with such baseness and selfishness. They traded a solid marriage and a family that backed them up for 42 minutes of infidelity, and fate ended up handing them a bill that cost them their lives. For my part, this is the absolute final point, and I move forward on my path, grateful to have cut that bond in time before their darkness reached me too. With this shocking and bloody outcome, we close one of the most intense stories of betrayal we've shared in Reddit stories. What started as a family disloyalty ended up dragging those involved into a world of debt and danger they couldn't escape. What do you think of this tragic ending? Do you believe fate ended up handing them the highest bill for their bad decisions? Or do you consider that the situation got completely out of control? How would you have reacted upon receiving that call from the in-laws? We want to know all your opinions, theories, and analyses on this shocking conclusion. Leave your answers in the comment box down below.